How's this for another privatisation success story? Private firms ran almost all care homes forced to shut for rule breaches in England. A study has found that more than 90% of facilities for children and 98% of those for adults that were closed down explicitly because of rule breaches, because again, there's nothing within the profit motive if you're providing a social service that means you should actually provide a good end-use product, that were closed down for these reasons. They will run for profit. Yeah, of course that's true. What's the incentive structure that would make a private company have to care about anything other than driving revenue for shareholders, driving value for owners, rather than, providing a good standard of care for children and adults? There's just no mechanism with which the private sector would do a good job at this, but let's continue. Let's read for a bit, shall we? Almost all the care homes shut down for endangering children or vulnerable adults were run to make a profit, according to a landmark study examining the long-term impact of outsourcing care to the private sector. Shock and awe. I cannot believe the private sector didn't care about whether or not they were endangering vulnerable people. Research published last week by Oxford University reveals that 98%, 804 out of 816 of the adult care homes closed by the Quality Care Commission in England to protect disabled, mentally ill and elderly people from harm between 2011 and 2023 were operated by private companies. Only 12 homes were run by either local authorities or charities. And again, it's just the legacy of the Conservative government from 2010 to 2023. The legacy, especially of the Cameron Osborne administration and their following of Thatcherism like it's scripture, rather than because they believed in it or because they wanted to change anything, just because that was the done thing and they followed it like a religion. And not only did their welfare reforms essentially deperson the disabled, we literally had UN advisors saying that we were violating the human rights of the disabled in things like welfare reform and the way in which we cared for them. Of course, rather than actually having a government department there to ensure that we were treating the disabled and the mentally ill and the vulnerable like the elderly were being treated well by our care sector, no, we just decided to sell it off to the private sector, again, completely without any kind of reason for doing so other than following Thatcherism like a religion. Because again, we don't want to have to care about disabled people. Surely there can be somebody in the private sector's problem for doing for profit. And yeah, turns out that Conservative Party economic policy has led to the point where the disabled aren't just getting screwed over by the welfare system, they're also getting screwed over by our approach to the care sector as well. What a surprise. The Conservative Party treats the disabled like non-people. The researchers also found that just over 90% of children's homes closed by Ofsted in England from 2014 to 2023 were run to make a profit too. The watchdog only cancels the registration of providers if standards designed to protect children are being consistently flouted or if there is evidence children are being harmed. Only 5 were local authority or charity homes. Again, where is the money in protecting children? How does the profit motive protect children from being harmed? It just doesn't. People are out here trying to think that, they're going to be having the freer the market, the freer the people. Or the private sector, they're more efficient. Yet the efficiency savings that you're going to get from the private sector, not that you necessarily get them once you've taken the profit into account anyway, because they're making a profit, but that's an efficiency saving that's being made there on actual service provision. There's a reason why we had to put laws in place to stop private capitalists putting children in factories, because it's good for profit. Welfare of children, that's of no relevance to the shareholders. And as we see here, right, they have no material incentive to look after kids. So as you've seen, the ones that do have an incentive, a democratic incentive, because they're publicly owned and publicly run and non-outsourced, they have a much better success rate than the private ones. And we see the results of all of this doctrinaire privatisation of the care sector under the Conservatives. It's led to children literally being harmed. Again, the bar is crazy high on this, that we consistently flouted the standards there to protect children. Anders Bach-Mortensen, who led the research, said for-profit providers were severely overrepresented in forced closure statistics in both adult and children's social care. Past research and reporting have shown that for-profit provision is often rated worse than public and third sector provision, but it's been unclear how this actually translates into practice. By tracking forced closures over the past decade, we've demonstrated that the strongest regulatory measure available to CQC and Ofsted is far more likely to occur in for-profit provision. Again, there's a super easy way of dealing with this, and that's nationalising them. Yeah, and it probably would be cheaper because we wouldn't have to again pay for profits out of public money because of the subcontraction. Over the last 2 decades, care has been increasingly outsourced to the private sector, but the study still found a disproportionate number of businesses were stripped of their registration for serious breaches of standards. For-profit providers operated 82% of adult care homes and 79% of children's homes during the period examined by the study. Ben Goodare, co-author of the research, said involuntary closures were the most extreme examples of care failure. Forced closures are a last resort intervention with severe consequences for residents. These closures often involve instances of severe neglect or abuse. They also incur substantial financial costs for local authorities, which are responsible for relocating residents. Again, this is a problem not just with austerity, but with privatisation and with the use of subcontraction within the public sector, is that all of the cost-cutting measures that you get, again, all of those efficiency savings, the reduction in actual service provision that you get from the efficiency savings doesn't actually save anything in the long run, because you have to pay all of that money again after the fact to clean up the mess that's been made, either by the failure of service provision or because of the failure of the private sector. To quote the great Mariana Mazzucato from Question Time, sometimes inaction is greater than the cost of action. And here we see the same thing happening again, where we try and find efficiency savings by getting the private sector to do it in the interest of profit. And what they do is they cut protection for children because they make more money that way. As simple as that. The primary function of the government is to keep its citizens safe, is a quote from Thatcher. Funny how this only applies to bombing people and not to child protection. Again, this is the entirety of Conservative Party dogma. And it's coming back in the form of children being neglected by the care sector because the private sector doesn't have their interests at heart. The underlying data for the report, which has been shared with the Observer, shows that one company, Atlas Project Team, was ordered to close 14 care homes in 2012, more than any other provider over the last 12 years. An adult safeguarding review in 2019 found that adults with learning disabilities, autism and mental health problems were subject to systemic neglect in homes run by the firm, which had pre-tax profits of £3 million before it was dissolved. A police investigation identified 2,600 instances of seclusion, with some residents wrongly confined up to 400 times. Vulnerable people were left without food, drink, heating, or access to toilets. Like, this is like violations of basic human rights that's going on here. Like, systemic neglect is not strong enough words to describe how disgusting this treatment is. And again, people with learning disabilities, autism, and mental health problems, people who are at the thin end of the wedge, who are on the sharp end of all of the problems that have been caused by the deterioration of the public realm during the neoliberal period of this country. And then they get shoved into the care of the private sector, and the private sector treats them like non-people because they don't want to treat them like people. They want to treat them like numbers on a graph on their balance sheets at the end of the financial year because their interest is profit, because that's how the private sector works. That's what their incentive structure is. The study, which analysed millions of data points recorded by regulators, also found that the care market had led to a concentration of old people's homes in affluent areas where firms were more likely to attract wealthy self-funded residents, and a concentrations of children homes in poorer areas where companies could source cheap properties and generate higher profits. Do I need to comment on how ridiculous this is? Again, this is what happens with markets. Provision goes where it's most profitable, not where it's most needed. The researchers note that these trends have left elderly people in deprived localities without enough care homes and have led to more vulnerable children being placed farther away from family and friends. The Labour government has promised to create a national care service, but the party is no longer committed to providing the majority of care through the public sector. Of course they're not. Of course they would U-turn on any public provision from this definitely not 100% neoliberal Labour government, which was a manifesto pledge in 2019. Rachel Reeves cancelled a planned cap on social care costs in July as part of her effort to fill what she said was a £22 billion black hole in the public finances. Great, brilliant. Thanks, Rachel. Really appreciate it. Looking forward to that budget, aren't we? What you could have won was a National Care Service in 2019, but you had to have floppy hair Brexit man instead. A Department of Health spokesperson said it was tackling the significant challenges facing social care. As part of this, we're also committed to building a National Care Service, underpinned by national standards and delivered locally, to improve the consistency of care and ensure everyone can live an independent and dignified life. We're going to have to get rid of the private sector first, which looks like that's unlikely to happen because, £22 billion gap in the nation's finances. Brilliant. Insane the hoops you have to jump through to build a council home or energy infrastructure. You can just do whatever you want if you're running care centres for profit, of course, yeah. stories we've heard, genuinely harrowing stories from the private care sector there. Again, this is Thatcherism writ large. This is what they wanted, and this is what you wanted if you continue voted for neoliberal politics. But yeah, it's another privatization success story. Hey there, if you enjoyed the video, make sure that you like and leave a comment. That helps the video out in the algorithm. If you subscribe and ring the bell, it'll let you know when I go live. I stream every day on YouTube and Twitch. You can also follow all of my socials down in the description. And if you want to support me in a more financial manner, there's a join button for membership to just 99p to be a member on YouTube, as well as a Patreon, and there's some merch there as well. And hopefully I'll catch you on the next video. Take care.